When I was broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich habits.
Banana.
When I was broke, I had rich habits.
Welcome back.
Yes, let's
Season
go.
2, episode TBD. Episode, yeah, it's definitely TBD. Okay, so
Yeah.
today you are
knocking a
with
few out.
Neal Andreino and
Chandler Haliburton, welcome to the Master Keys podcast. We're going to talk about a lot of awesome things today.
yes, the main topic today is going to be about selling your house, the process of doing so, and we just have a bunch of advice and different steps that you should follow when you go through that process. And then we also have some news, I think, kind of relating to some of the stuff we've talked about before. It just kind of keeps morphing, and we want to hash it open a little bit more. Specifically, the one that both Chandler and I have kind of lost our minds about because we think it's going to change the industry for buyers, sellers,
Yep.
and also for realtors. It's really going to make a big impact. So we talked about it a little bit before. It's the open bid system that's going to be on realtor.ca.
Yep.
It's going to allow consumers to see the number of bids and the pricing of the bids. Anyways, the company that got
Well, we don't know yet
Yeah.
what the level of transparency is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think even within these platforms, the seller will have some freedom to choose. Do they want everyone to see each other's bids? Do they not? What about conditions? So a lot of that's gonna come out in the wash. But even just the fact that offers are going to have to be registered and legitimized, I can tell you firsthand that I don't believe there's a lot of imaginary, oh, and now you're competing. Oh, now there's an offer. Most times it's like there's 7 or 9 offers, maybe more. Listing agents aren't lying about that, and there's not much difference between 6 offers and 7 offers. So it's not like they're fudging.
There was a
that
lot
at
of
all.
feedback on that people are like, oh, the realtors are taking advantage of people. I honestly don't think there's much of that. And I realize a realtor doesn't even really want to be a part of a multi-bid situation if they don't have to be.
Well, I mean, there's also just the sheer hassle of like, oh, okay, so I made up an imaginary bid, then you didn't outbid it, and now I have no bid, and it has to sit on like it's not the problem people think it is. However, it is nice to know the actual registered number of bids. Because right now, some agents won't tell you, some agents will, and there's a lot of unpredictability out there. What else are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about selling your house. That's the biggest one. So we're going to be going over all the steps there, like I mentioned. But before we got into that, you had a story here that got you kind of fired up, and I think rightfully so.
Man, there's lots of interesting things going on in the news. Those of you here locally in Halifax will know that property tax increase just got passed. So it's an effective rate change of 4.5%, 3% of which is to go towards climate change initiative. So we're going to go ahead and just fix the climate here with this extra 3% property tax. There's a bit of an
interesting time of doing that. They're making more tax revenue than they ever have, and now they're increasing the taxes again when everyone's already facing a lot of issues with inflation and other expenses with home ownership. Just slapping it on there now is. Mike Savage said himself, he said, now is not the time to be addressing this. It really isn't.
It's so, and they always make the same arguments like, well, there's no sense having low tax. What good do low taxes do if the world explodes? Yeah. It's like, well, what good does a nice environment do if everyone's poor? Yeah. Right? So that's a stupid argument. Yeah. But it's the same one that they make for any time. I do want to kind of get into some weird nuance because people will might be curious at how this actually works. So the way they set the tax rate is kind of done inversely. They say, okay, this is how much property tax revenue we've brought in the past. And they decided this year that we want to raise the total property tax revenue up by 4.6%. Mm-hmm. And then what they do is say, okay, if we want that to increase by 4.6%, how much have our assessments raised? Okay, our assessment has raised enough to already compensate for that change. And then we can actually lower the property tax rate down. So in a weird way, yes, you're going to be paying more property tax, but your property tax rate will actually decline. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those out there that are going to maybe find a nuancing, well, actually the property tax rate didn't go up, it declined. It declined because the assessment's up so much that they're still making that extra 4.6% while the rate's going down.
Yeah.
No one cares about that. I don't even know why.
At the end of the day, your effective bill will still be higher.
Yeah.
That's what everyone's concerned about is that
and we're going to fix
bill.
the climate. So that's good. I'm sure we'll fix it. Another thing that I found that I saw was really interesting, and this got a bit of traction in the news, is a study was done looking province by province at how much of the housing stock was owned by
what they call investors.
no, not even what they call investors. Well, sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
People that own more than one property,
Yeah.
right? So in Nova Scotia, it was found that about 40% of all real estate, or what they called housing stock, which again, I don't know what they're referring to as housing stock, but 40% of housing stock was owned by individuals that had more than one property.
Yeah.
But this could range from anyone that has like a single family home plus a cottage to someone who maybe has 5 rentals to a big corporation that owns multiple apartment buildings. And within each one of those apartment buildings, has many individual units. So depending on how they calculate this housing stock,
Condos and stuff like that.
yeah, not even condos, but is one apartment rental one housing stock unit or not? Right.
I guess it's they labeled it. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people view this as, oh my gosh, how terrible that 40% of the housing stock is owned by people who are investors. And it's like, man, that's why some of this data is so misleading, because one, you don't know how many of those are people with just one extra little property, a mom and pop operation, or how much are condos and apartment units and all these things. And our population is relatively small, but then highly condensed with rentals in certain areas.
Makes good stats.
Yeah, you can kind of just make them say whatever you want. The one thing that I thought was funny is I was like low-key a little bit proud of Nova Scotians, because you and I both really believe in real estate investing.
Yeah.
And we believe in real estate literacy and educating yourself and what it can do. So a lot of people out there in Nova Scotia buying second and third and more properties actually made me kind of pumped for Nova Scotians.
Yeah. What were did you get any other provinces?
They kind of all ranged. This is the other thing.
I say most of them are around a similar point.
Yeah, most of them are like
2%.
29 to 41, which makes me think it includes rental stock units.
It's got to be.
Because, but like the fact that they don't really go into the nuance on the numbers, I think is intentionally inflammatory. It's like, oh, let's just throw this out there because that sounds terrible. 30 to 40% of housing stock is owned.
It is again, it is a little nerve wracking. I like to say I'm with you on the being proud, but it's also a little nerve wracking just on the idea that they might be leveraged multiple times, and also that there is a lot of first time investors buying secondary properties, and a lot of people just in general buying it, I think, because of like FOMO, and they're seeing other people do it. So it is a little bit concerning, I think, on some level, to think that there's that much housing. Almost half is technically secondary, like owned by somebody who owns like 2. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah,
but if we all know that is really good for people's wealth accumulation, right? Then I think we shouldn't demonize it. Right?
No, 100%. I'm not saying demonize it. I guess for me, I'm more so thinking on like a price perspective and like a basis of like, okay, interest rates start flying up. If there's a rental shortage, or like not a shortage of renters and excess of units, you could face some issues. Like that's what I'm always looking for, is like what's going to cause us to spiral over where things could slow down or things could pull back.
Yeah. It also emphasizes though the need for new construction product to be fast tracked. Because people who are critical of this would say, oh my gosh, well, this is why I can't buy a place. And so the government needs to bang out a lot more units.
I think someone's going to respond to that, though, because following this article, there was another article saying that new construction product was being purchased, 75 or 80% of new construction product was being purchased by investors or people who already owned property. And we deconstructed that because most people are buying and they already own a house and they're real estate pre-purchasing to sell for the next one.
Yeah.
But that's a super high number, but I think that really is driven by the fact that people will likely put a deposit and technically purchase their new home before they sell their previous one and do a bridge finance or whatever it may be.
Yeah, or speculative buying pre-con, as we kind of talked with a guest the other day.
Yeah.
Finger on the pulse. How you feeling about the market right now?
The usual fear-mongering Neal's coming out. No, we've gone over this, but like interest rates are going up. And I think that's driving a lot of the older gen to list. And so you're seeing a ton of listings coming on right now.
A lot of listings coming on.
And the combination is yes, there is a ton of people that are saturating it and buying it up, but they're also facing the higher rates when they go to make their purchases. And so it's impacting their ability to necessarily bid higher and what they can buy. And so it's starting to cause, like, I feel like in the last 2 weeks, I've heard of more houses than I not ever have in the last year, where they're on market without bids. Or they didn't sell in the first 5 days like everything else.
There's been a bunch of those. Also, I went through and did a quick count of multi-unit properties in the Dartmouth core. So we're talking like an area that's less than 1 kilometer in diameter. And there have been 9 pop up in the last 10 days.
Yeah. Well, see,
Those aren't like, those are just multi-unit properties. So like not counting single family. I'm talking about someone who might be looking to pick up an investment property in downtown Dartmouth. There's been 9. Right now there's 4 in Fairview that are all walking distance to each other.
I feel like there's an increase in multi-units coming up on market because most of these people are investors and they understand that rates have a giant impact on the value of a multi-unit. And so they're trying to get it quickly. Because I feel like a lot of my older clientele is like, I know when rates go up, things slow down, prices change, and they're trying to then list and get this moved before things happen.
That's part of it for sure. The other thing is we're now, 45 days, 60 days removed from the end of rent evictions and the end of, COVID.
Definitely, yeah.
Like, so landlords know that their properties are worth significantly more when they're vacated. So a lot of the units you're seeing out there actually have some
There was a bunch of vacant units.
Yeah, which means they're worth way more, which just shows how a lot of these initiatives that the government took are actually exacerbating the problem.
They're not going to release these units. Instead of releasing the units and selling the property, they are leaving them empty because there's more value in them. And they'll sit empty for months sometimes before they get all of them empty.
And the person that's going to buy them is either going to own or occupy them, which is awesome, or they're going to renovate them and raise them to a new price point. But either way, it's made the problem worse, not better. The other thing is some of these, I know because I checked the title on them, some of them have been owned by Oda province people and even Oda country people who, interestingly, it's really curious. A lot of Oda country investors are very tapped into their local temporary or student visa community. So they often rent to non-Nova Scotians. Remember, the caveats in this new tax ruling is that you can avoid paying the extra property tax and you can avoid paying the extra deed transfer tax if you rent to Nova Scotians.
Yep.
Not if you rent to international students.
Yeah.
So,
what we're saying though, it kind of their rules are actually in some ways helping things for what they were objective. Their objective, they said, was to kind of slow it down, cool it off a little bit, and make it a little bit more attainable for people. So some of these things are actually assisting with that. I think on the rental side, they're not.
Well, like anything else, it just proves that supply is what helps. So a lot of these units coming on is what actually helps the issue.
Exactly.
If anything,
they're forcing the hand with the supply because they can't build. They haven't approved or allowed new construction to go at a pace that's actually needed, and so they're kind of forcing the old product back on.
Yeah, but if you take those 9 properties in downtown Dartmouth and the 4 just in Fairview, and then there's another 4 in the West End on the peninsula,
all over the place. Yeah,
those are all people who are going to be vacated.
Yeah,
they're going to the properties are going to trade at higher prices. The mortgages are going to go up. The rents are going to go up. Then
our true inventory number is not growing.
No, it's
we're just shuffling more in the meantime.
We're shuffling, and each time we shuffle, people move out.
People get displaced, numbers go up. Yeah, so realistically, these are not assisting with it. But yeah, this is all happening in Toronto. Like you have the numbers here from Toronto, but it says home sales were down by 18.6%.
Yeah,
that's huge. That
is huge.
Down.
That is huge, and it was actually the lowest level since June of 2000. So here's the first thing you think. So this is big news out of the Canadian mortgage trends. They published this that, as you said, home sales were down 18.6% year over year from February, reaching the lowest rates.
30%.
Yeah, that's the kicker, because normally you think, okay, the home sales are down because low inventory. No, the inventory is actually up and the number of home sales is down. And this was an important kind of takeaway from this real estate analyst. They said sales are expected to, quote, fall significantly once the current pool of buyers with 90-day rate holds is exhausted. These folks have mortgage approvals at rates up to 100 basis points below current levels, and they are highly motivated to transact. So because all these rates are going up, people are going to purchase now, but after those people clear the market, that there's going to be a significant decline in the real estate transactions.
Well, so the average amount of money available to spend is going to go down by like 10% now, and then another quarter, another few percentage points. It's just,
both the pre-approval and your ability to carry it just personally. So that's news coming out of Toronto.
Yeah.
But Toronto is kind of
we use Toronto as kind of like a basis for like all of Canada, really. And I feel like things that
sample size.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's exacerbated in the sense that their pricing is so high that anything that happens, like their fluctuations is like 20% down, 30% up. Like it's just insane. The numbers move around so heavy.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to... Halifax and Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada has been super sheltered to it for a lot of... Pretty much through all the downturns, I feel like. It's been slower, but I don't think we've taken massive beatings. I think now where we've had this crazy growth, which has been not experienced here either, we might actually face a little bit of a downturn. Like I think in Toronto, they're used to spins up and down. Looking at the chart here, it's not been like the crazy up and downs.
It's because also there's a very small difference between like when you're going from price points of 330 to 370, right? Like that's small. When you're going from price points of like 750 to 900 all of a sudden, that's a bigger, variance.
It's swinging
there.
a couple hundred grand.
Yeah. So another thing that was in the news last time out, or a couple episodes ago, we brought you the story of this poor family who was selling their home. Their tenant refused to move out. They'd racked up about $15,000 just by not paying their rent. The problem was the owners had an accepted offer to sell that home, and they'd given all the proper notice. And now they had to delay the closing date twice, and their buyer was threatening to sue them. That person's been topped. That tenant has been topped. So
They get better.
this poor lady, she went through a divorce.
Ranger.
Yeah, she went through a divorce, and as part of her marital separation, she had to move out of the marital home, and she gave notice to move into her rental property that she had. And this is a woman who, is nearing retirement age, so she thought, I'll move into the rental property here. The tenant just flat out has refused to move out. And because of COVID restrictions on evictions and the backlog at the tenancy board, there was nothing she could do about it. And she's been living out of a suitcase for 1.5 years going through this process.
That's insanity. And I feel like there's not gonna be much support on this end. Like, if this was on the flip side,
Look at this poor lady. Like, it's so...
flash poor lady up on the screen. No,
Oh
but
my God, it's so sad.
it is very sad and it's brutal. And I think a lot of this stuff goes on. I think, unfortunately, she was unable to get something else in the meantime. But I think this happens to a lot of people, and they end up just finding other means and kind of going through with it, and it doesn't make the news. But this will get little support is the thing that I think kind of bothers me. Like, if she was on the other foot, this would get blasted everywhere, and they would be going crazy for it. But this will not get like any sort of major support online. It'll kind of just pass and whatever, right? And like we should bring this on, but Selby's Bunker here, Jason Selby, some of you guys will know, Selby's Bunker is awesome. He was in the news for a similar thing where a professional tenant effectively took over his house, wouldn't pay rent, destroyed his home.
Yeah, in Cole Harbor, yeah.
Out in Cole Harbor.
Stole his ID, racked up credit card debt.
Exactly, stole his ID, racked up credit card debt. Like, it happens all the time. I've talked about it before in here too. My first rental, he didn't pay rent, he stole my appliances, they trashed the home, like on and on and on. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. I think it just doesn't get publicized nearly
And
as
again,
much.
like big institutional landlords, we take on that risk. Not saying
100%.
like I'm a
It
big
works.
institutional landlord. I'm not, but like I'm, bigger than a mom and pop operation.
Yeah.
This was a lady who had her marital home, and they had an investment townhouse.
Yeah.
She goes through a divorce. Tough situation. Again, middle-aged single person at this point, gives the right notice, follows all the rules, and for 1.5 years, she hasn't been able to get access to her property. And she's lived out of a suitcase for 1.5 years. And what it really speaks to, though, is that we all, both sides, and you hate to put sides out there, but both landlords and tenants need more effective tenancy boards, and the rules need to be the rules on both sides.
And there
If
needs to
you're
be a
served
mutual
notice,
respect.
Period.
There needs to be mutual respect to both parties, and like, I don't know, like you're when you're signing a lease, like you understand that you're not owning the house, like you, and at the same time, when something breaks, you have an expectation that people are going to fix it, and that's what that you're paying for, and you're getting that luxury to do so.
Yeah.
But you also have to follow the rules, whether you're staying or not. Like,
These things should also be. It should be criminal. Like, it's so weird to me that you can steal this amount of money from people, and because it's only covered by tenancy board law, not criminal law. The ramifications are actually not that bad. I mean, the individual you were talking about there before, because he did identity theft, he got charged with fraud and things like that.
Yeah.
So he'll have some criminal ramifications. But just skipping out on rent,
and your credit doesn't get hit, anything like that.
it's brutal. So anyway, I hope that she gets a resolution here now that it's been picked up 1.5 years later, finally by the media. Hopefully she gets some support there.
Definitely. Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Selling your house. You ever sold your personal house before?
Yes, one time.
How'd you find that?
It was fine.
Did you find you got a little stressed out, or a little more emotional, or a little more intense? Like
No, but I did what everyone does, where in like a span of 3 weeks, I got all the crap done around the house that I'd waited 3.5 years to do and never gotten around to, and I just hammered it out right before we moved out. So like it was an old home with a stone foundation, so I spray foamed the basement because that just cleans up the stone foundation. I reparged the exterior. I put up the backsplash that was sitting in the basement for forever. Did some painting, like just all these.
You didn't
things.
want to sell the house by the time you were done.
Yeah, well, I'd actually moved into a new house, and I didn't even put a lockbox on. I just put a key under the mat, and I called like some agents that I know that are in the area. I'm like, hey, when do you guys want to sell this house? Yeah. And I kind of regret it some days because I did love that home, and it's worth a lot more now than it was.
Say, where's that?
That was on Hawthorne. Yeah. So I bought it for $180 and fixed it up significantly. When we sold it for $387, they had to get a second appraisal because the first appraisal was like, there's nothing to support this value.
No way. 387.
Yeah, right now we'd probably get like 7-ish.
I'd say, yeah,
probably
definitely
more,
7, 8.
Like we would put a good, yeah. So we sold that one, and it was kind of, it was a relatively smooth process. Like the home was in good shape. I'd been through the process a lot, so
yeah. I did it twice, a couple times, but I find it's like when I first started. So I went to the real estate board. I was getting my license, and there was a lady sitting next to me. I don't know who it was. We were just chatting, and she's like, "Oh, like da da da," and she's like, "I don't know how." Oh, she said, "Why are you getting it if you're an engineer?" And I said, "Well, I flip homes, and I'd like to sell my own houses." And she's like, "I would never sell my own house." And I was like, "I don't understand that. Like, you totally want to save the commissions, whatever." And then I did sell one house, wasn't too bad. Then I went to go sell another one, and it was a bit of a like negotiation war at the end.
Yeah.
And I got so heated, like,
you got emotional.
I got emotional, and there needed to be a second barrier between me and the other agent.
Yeah,
because they would give me the whole spiel, like, "Well, this is broken, and the inspection showed this."
Yeah,
and it was like they were taking pokes at me, and I just got super fired up.
You would, yeah.
And to be honest with you, the deal ended up crashing.
Oh my gosh!
And then I ended up selling it like a couple weeks later for like $5,000 less. Like it came down to like us like negotiating our $500, and I was like, "Nope, I won't." And they're like, "All right, fine, we're out." And they declined, and then I ended up having to resell it a few weeks later for $5,000 less for me to spite them over 500 earlier.
So, I mean, I bought stuff off market, and I represent myself for that. But now anything on market, I don't represent myself anymore, really.
For purchases?
Yeah, if it's on market.
Really?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think of, I guess just my last two things that I purchased on market.
You went through another agent.
Yeah.
Was it the listing agent that you got?
No.
It's somebody in the office.
Someone in my office.
What's the logic on that?
Shout out to Marcus. Because there is something to be said for that arm's length. You know, it is a little too close
for comfort sometimes.
Yeah, and also just liability. Like, one time when I purchased one of my own properties, I find myself like I get a little looser with my paperwork and I don't prioritize it as much. There isn't someone being like, "Hey, you got to do this, blah blah blah."
Condition date passed.
Yeah, and I did an amendment for a deal. This was years ago that included a cashback credit on closing, which used to be really commonplace and now is not. And the board threw the book at me.
Yeah,
and one of their main things was, "Well, you were representing yourself." It's like, man, so if I had another agent representing myself, like there wouldn't be an issue, but I was kind of held to a higher standard. And actually some of the haters out there that probably listen to this podcast still hate other agents. Like they'll still bring that up with like,
I've been seeing the comments and stuff.
Yeah.
But
that's right. Someone did comment.
A couple people have commented that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward story, but
it used to be fairly common, the whole idea of getting cash back on closing. So basically, if there was an issue and you went to the inspections, you could say instead of taking $10,000 off of the price, let's give us $10,000 off back on closing day, and that gives you the actual $10,000 in cash to get the work done.
Yeah.
But the banks didn't like that because people started pushing it to a point where they weren't doing down payments anymore.
Exactly.
Like they were like, "Okay, we'll pay $400, give us back $100,000 on closing, and that's our down payment effectively."
Yep.
And so now that's where kind of the Mortgage Plus came to be, is this little 10% that they'll give you.
But you want to hear the funny story?
What's that?
That purchase, I was putting 20% down, so there was no issue with that at all.
Oh,
I also was doing purchase plus improvements. So I already had all my quotes and all my extra was adding it into the mortgage. What happened was beyond the purchase plus improvements, like something happened where a toilet leaked and it leaked into the bottom unit, and a place that we were going to do no inspections on. All of a sudden I'm like, well, this place is falling apart. I'm going to do inspections. The inspector found there was all knob and tube, even though they said there wasn't knob and tube. So all of a sudden I was about to back out of the deal. I'm like, I'm going to back out. They're like, "Oh no, don't back out. I'm like, well, man, you got to give me some money for this. And I think it was $16,000. And I was in the situation like, oh man, I already have my appraisal. I already have all my quotes. My mortgage is approved.
Just a giant mess to
I
move
don't
it
want to
all.
do a new purchase plus improvements. So the lawyers worked it out like, hey, we'll just do a holdback on closing, which is also very common.
Yeah.
Anyone listening out here will have had a holdback.
Oh, so you've definitely still
And the
seen
holdback
holdbacks.
can be released to me to do the work. And then, the board just threw the book at me like, oh, you can't do that. I'm like, well, what do you think I was trying to accomplish? They're like, well, how do we know that that money went to do the work? I'm like, here's all the receipts, man, like for all the work. Like, well, how do we know it's the same money? Like, well, does it really matter? What do you think I was trying to accomplish? Like, you were trying to, like, what if you just put extra money in your own pocket? Like,
Chandler
well,
was using the money to buy a dune buggy.
this was before the dune buggy days. But I'm like,
the
you
bank
realize
say
that
anything?
if I wanted, no, the bank didn't care because they were doing it based on the appraisal anyway.
I didn't give a
right?
shit.
I was like, you realize if I wanted more money in my pocket, I could have just asked for more commission, right? Like,
I feel like the bank would have been the one that should care, if anyone's going to care.
no, in the case where you're doing it based on the appraised value anyway, you're not doing it on the purchase
No,
price.
I
but in
just
theory-
mean exactly.
totally.
In theory, the
It-
person that should be like, yo, what the hell? is
Yeah,
gonna be
yeah.
the
There were
bank.
like our regulatory body technically has no jurisdiction over that. So what they kind of jammed me up on is like, it was bad paperwork, and especially where you're representing yourself, it should have been handled, this way and blah blah blah. But yeah, as recently as like,
So you got Marcus
man,
as your fall guy.
8 months ago, someone mentioned that they were out with a group of people and there was a realtor there, and they brought that up. And that's something that was over a decade ago that I bought that property.
Marcus, do not write up any cashbacks for Chandler.
Yeah. Anyway, wasn't expecting we were going to talk about that today, but for anyone out there who's
Now you know.
sipping the haterade wants to know the details, that's what it was. But
All right, we're getting into selling houses.
yeah.
Enough about our houses.
So we've got 8 steps here towards selling your home. We're going to work through them here one at a time, and then we'll recap them at the end. Step number 1, really important, obviously, is to decide that you're truly ready to sell. What's that mean?
So you need you can say I want to sell, but you need to think about 2 things. There's financial ramifications involved with doing so. There's,
Yep.
like Chandler said, there might be 50 little things you need to get done before you want to list that are worth your time and money, and they add up. They honestly do. It doesn't always have to be big, but between buying the paint and the backsplash and getting the spray foam, like it's not hard to spend $5-10 grand to get ready to sell.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Additionally, you have a mortgage and there's mortgage terms involved that you signed, and a lot of times they're not lined up perfectly with when you want to sell. Like you might have signed a 5-year and now you're 3 years into it. So
Yeah.
you're breaking this 2 years early. The bank is going to have a penalty for that. When you sign, they had a thing in there that says 8 ranges. It can be 3 months interest, which is usually the lowest penalty you'll get,
Yep.
up to as high as the interest remaining in that entire term. So let's say your payment is got $400 of interest per payment and you have 24 months left. You could have a $5 grand penalty for for shutting down or paying out that mortgage early. So on the financial side, those are things you need to consider before getting ready to sell. And then mentally and kind of emotionally, are you prepared to let go of the home, and why are you doing it? And then are you ready for all the work that's involved? So getting the work done. And then once you get to the point of listing for sale, in today's market, it's a little bit better because it's like, all right, it's like a 5-day thing. You just go super hard, 5 days, you get a hotel, you move out, and off you go. But it can also be like a couple months, and you could be having intermittent showings. So it's like, oh, like somebody wants to come by tonight at 6. So you got to keep your house in like the semi-stage format all the time. You can't truly live, and you got to keep everything super clean. Then you got to get the whole family packed up and out of the house for a half an hour for them to go do it. And then you get back, and they're still sitting there in your driveway, and you're like, I don't want to be rude, but I also need to get into my house.
Oh man, back in the day when things were slower, it was brutal. I'd have to call someone like, "Hey, I know it's 6:15, and you're probably just finishing supper, but there is a group of people who are just down the road. Is there any chance you could step outside for 20?"
You look out your window, and there's like 4 cars with lights on, and people just kind of waving at you.
The other thing to really, a big part of deciding that you are truly ready to sell is figuring out where you're going next. And that I find is huge right now, especially when you're dealing with people who are maybe downsizing or scaling up, when they're at that kind of tipping point of that this sale also leads to another purchase.
Yep.
That is really challenging in this market, and more often than not, you're having to make the purchase first and sort that out before even listing your home, and that's contrary to what people used to
Super
do,
nerve-wracking.
right? Because of like the implication of that is that you could have 2 mortgages.
Your house might not sell for what you're thinking.
Yeah.
How do you know your exact budget? Like, well, if I know my house is going to sell for $200K over ask,
could have bought something bigger.
I would want the one next to it that was nicer. So
So you need to figure out your end destination and what that's going to look like as part of the getting ready to sell. Like Neal mentioned, checking out your mortgage penalties, preparing the home, preparing yourself mentally and emotionally, but also figuring out where you're going to go next.
number 2, picking a realtor. So his name is Neal Andreino at Remax Neal. No.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, picking a realtor. This is kind of an obvious one. Again, assuming you're going with the realtor, there is all these other services out there, like I don't even know what they're called, but these $300 or $3,000 you can list your home. We've talked about this, I think, in a decent amount of length, but we should honestly do a breakdown on why we don't think it's worth going with one of these mere postings. There is value sometimes.
Yeah. To each their own, right?
But it's there. I think the simple one that everyone kind of leans on in the realtor industry is mere postings is what they're called. So they're just simply posting your house. You pay a flat fee. They might have some extra ads in there, like they might give you an assessment of what they think you should list for. They might have somebody come do photos, but basically they do a little to nothing on otherwise. They on average sell for like it was like an average like 8 or 11% lower. I don't know the exact number. Don't quote me on that, but it's like 8% or 11% lower than what MLS Realtor represented homes sell for.
So those services get you on the MLS system, right?
That's
Which
about
means
it.
you're on there where the majority of people look for properties. It depending on the product you buy from one of these companies, that may include photos, it may not. It may include pricing advice, it may not. So it's kind of a pick your own adventure there.
It's a little digress, but I quickly want to say too, having been not a realtor before and flipping houses, I thought that this was the way to do it, and I was like, definitely want to sell stuff through this mere posting system. Now I would never go back to doing it because I realize I see myself as an agent dealing with those mere postings, how much worse and how much more difficult they are to move over and how much slower they move because like it just there's nobody really taking responsibility for it. Unfortunately, a homeowner, it's hard to take responsibility on top of dealing with everything to do it. And recently I just had one that sold for about 10 grand less than what someone else had offered because it was through a mere posting system, but they just didn't handle the offers properly where they weren't willing to look at something because it was just they're like, no, like talk to the seller.
All I will say is that if you look at the data, it is overwhelmingly in favor of listing what someone would call a full service, full agent representation. That's not to say it's for everyone, but the data is overwhelmingly that it sells for more money.
Yeah. Anyways,
that said,
enough of our
that's not a pitch. There are also some great companies doing really creative
Exactly.
things and so on and so forth.
100%.
So what do you think is actually the most important criteria in picking a realtor?
That's a good question. How do I not? No, I think honestly, like a big one is for me, obviously you need to, like on a base level, they need to have a knowledge of your area. They need to have done this a few times before. Like they can't be completely fresh and new. And I say that being pretty new in this industry.
You're new by years. You're not new by volume. That's a huge thing.
True. And I
People
appreciate
can
you
be
saying that.
experienced by years and not experienced by volume.
Very much so. Yeah, no, that's a good point. But just exactly having a knowledge base and then someone that you honestly get along with, as terrible as that sounds, like you need someone that you can be 100% comfortable to talk with and know that they're also being 100% honest with you and that they're comfortable with you to tell you what you need to do. Because I see it where like the realtor and the client don't get along, and so they struggle to ever have the conversation. They can't tell each other what needs to be done. So the realtor can't tell the client like, hey, you need to fix this in your house, and vice versa. The client's like, I'm not getting the service that I need in return. Right. So I feel like that's a really, really important thing because a lot of us offer very similar services when it comes to photos and packages and this and that. And knowledge of the area, at least in HRM, it's not so big where it's pretty easy to get into a neighborhood and get a pretty quick understanding, especially with electronics today. Like you can pull up averages and numbers and a lot of stuff about homes in 2 seconds.
I also say, you need to be careful of someone who says, oh, I'm an expert in this particular area. Because all that tells me is that they're maybe not doing a lot of volume, right? Because anyone who does a lot of volume sells everywhere.
Yeah.
And if you look at your own neighborhood, I mean, I think of the people up and down my street and the people who have moved into my neighborhood, none of them were actually also from my neighborhood. So sometimes having an agent who's got a broader reach, because a person might be moving from across town, out of province, I don't think the neighborhood expert is necessarily the be all and end all. That said, you need someone who is familiar with different neighborhoods and the value in your area. Because also, if they're an expert in your neighborhood, how are they going to deal with some pushback from a buyer's agent who says, well, what about this property in the neighborhood over?
Yeah.
Right. Well, if they don't know that neighborhood too, they can say, well, as you know, in that neighborhood, the school districts aren't as good as in this neighborhood.
Exactly.
Right. So you need someone who has knowledge, and knowledge is acquired through not necessarily years on the job, but in volume. Right. No, it's true. Especially in how quickly, like think of how short period of time we've been doing this podcast and how much has changed in that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So just because someone's been around for 15 years doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be the perfect person to handle this market.
They missed the last 90 days and they don't know what's going on.
Exactly. Someone who's just been hyperactive in these last 12 months could be a better, could have more relevant knowledge for your sale.
And it depends on what you're selling. You need to understand if you're selling like a multi-unit property, you really, really, really want someone who understands multi-unit properties. That's one I see so commonly where it's like, duplexes, triplexes, and 4 units are listed by agents that don't have a comfort level with rental real estate, and it's misrepresented. It's not kind of showcased properly. The price points are all over the map because they don't necessarily know how to price and value certain units. And then when it comes time for a buyer's agent to come through, they can't acquire the information that they need, and then they're not properly pitched or sold to those people, which really I think has impacted the sale price. Again,
Totally.
this market is aggressive as heck, so people are just bidding. They're kind of forgetting about all the agent stuff because there's enough people who are very well educated and versed on what they want that they're bidding relentlessly. But when the market's a little bit more normal, we'll say, that stuff really comes into play. And I remember before this market picked up, like, you could squeak deals. I'd see agents on there. I'm like, I know I can squeak a deal from them because they don't know what they're representing.
There's also, and this is relevant to some of the conversations we've had about the multiple offer situation, there is a science to handling multiple offers. So in this particular market, having an agent who does volume enough that they are used to multiple offers on both sides, like, so they know what to expect on the buyer side, and they know how to handle and steer those offers on the selling side.
Yeah.
Like, that is super important in this particular market.
I have one last item.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a weird one, but I believe in it now. They need to have some aspect of online presence.
Yeah.
It is so big. Like, the real estate book's not really there. They can have a really beautiful sign. Nobody really cares. You gotta have presence online. It's crazy. My most recent listing, I had 2 random people message me off of Instagram, ask for showings. Like,
Yeah, totally.
never had met. They don't even follow me. I don't even actually know how they even saw this
Someone
story.
tagged them, someone shared it. Yeah.
Someone sent it to them, and then they, you know what I mean? So that stuff is unbelievably important now. I cannot stress that enough. So if you want someone who has a bit of that, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah. But again, just I think that having a really good, comfortable fit with the person that you can talk candidly is important also.
Exactly.
All right. So you've made the decision you're going to sell. You've picked your agent. Now what?
You got to prepare yourself to sell and
The
go
actual,
through
the actual process.
the actual process, the work involved of putting up that backsplash. No, in this case, there's a couple things. So on like an administration side, you kind of need to pick a target date. If you don't have that much work to do, you can probably pick the exact date. If you have a couple weeks worth of work, you put a rough date on where you want to be. And you also need to get a rough idea of pricing of where you want to be. I see that fluctuate all the way to the point of like 2 minutes before we list sometimes when we're back and forth. And I think that, again, is where your agent's going to come into play and giving you advice on a price, but also because the technique, it's like some people want to price a little bit lower and shoot it up. Or if you don't have the risk tolerance or you feel more comfortable coming at a higher price, like that's where in today's market, it's really important your agent gives you some guidance, but you want to pick that. So you pick your price, you pick your date, and in that same time, you're also going to have to complete staging, your photos. Staging doesn't always have to be full on like furniture coming into your house, but I think it's always worth getting what's called a staging consult.
Yeah.
Where they come through the home and they might say, hey, look, let's move this couch out of this room and move it into another room. Let's get rid of some of these things off of these surfaces. Let's put these books on this shelf.
Yeah, let's also, I've got some throw pillows. Let's put them here for the photos. We're going to, add some greenery here, all that. Yeah.
Exactly. And make sure all your light bulbs are replaced.
Shout outs to Charlotte Interiors.
Yeah, we have to give Charlotte. Yeah, she's a beast.
Yeah.
But getting all those things done and then also getting, like, if you can, drone shots are nice, but flying a drone seems to get harder and harder every day.
Yeah.
Walk through videos, all the stuff getting ready for social media. This period of time is going to be surprisingly more stressful than you think because you will find out that you have so much stuff in your house.
Yeah, I always tell people, this is the most invasive, worst part of the process. So when you hire an agent, they should be able to kind of tell you a few things. They should say, this is our target date. This is when we're going to list, and here's why.
Yep.
Right? We're going to list on this particular date because it's after this holiday or before this, or it's a good time of year, et cetera. And our marketing will line up for a 5-day offer window in this particular market that we're in currently.
Yeah.
So they're going to be able to tell you the date that you're listing. They're also going to be able to tell you how the following 5 or 6 days are going to go, when viewings are likely to be highest, when we can expect to get feedback, when we'll take offers, how we'll manage those offers, and what those 5 to 7 days will look like. Then they'll be able to tell you what the due diligence period is going to look like, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But additionally, they should be able to tell you the 5 days leading up to the listing, what you need to do. And maybe it's 2 weeks or what have you. But it's going to be a list. Listen, we need your most recent property tax bill. We need 12 months of your heating costs. We need 12 months of your electrical costs. If you have a recent water sample test, if you're on well and septic, we need that.
Yep.
I need a list of every upgrade you've done to the home in the time you've been here, ideally with paperwork if you have it. Do you have a survey or location certificate?
Yep.
Do you have any information on the septic? Do you have warranty for the appliances?
Condo docs.
All of these things, condo docs, rules and regulations, subdivision rules, all of those things that is what your agent is going to tell you they need leading up to the actual listing. Then they're going to go over your disclosure document with you, all these sort of things, and make advice on, in preparation for the photos, do this, do that. We're also going to bring the stager in and so on. So once you pick your agent, they're going to guide you through that preparation to sell. And it's the actual logistical things that you do leading up and getting all the supporting documents, to the activation, to the showing window, and to the due diligence.
Question for you on that one. How do you often do pre-home inspections?
I don't, but in this market, they're becoming more common. I have done them in the past.
And so a pre-home inspection would be in getting your home inspected by a licensed inspector prior to listing. So you can say, look, like I've already done it, and we went through and we fixed a bunch of little things that he said, and now the home is ready to roll.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, as soon as you know about something, you are legally obligated to disclose it. So it's like, if you find something in that inspection report, like you're now sharing it with the world.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if you disclose all these things up front, then in good faith, the buyer can't really come back to you about them after the fact.
Exactly.
Right? They can't say, oh, well, we're wanting $5,000 off because of this, this, and this. Like, no, we told you about that up front, right? You have a copy of the pre-inspection report.
And if you have a good condition house and it's a multiple bid situation, they might,
might waive it.
Waive the condition.
Yeah.
Plus, they might be a bit more aggressive. Like I know I have a lot of buyers that they just, you're not expected to know everything about a house. So when they walk through, they don't know what they're looking at. So they have to bid based on assuming there could be issues.
Yeah.
But if they're like, hey, a licensed inspector is telling me there's no issues, I'm good to be aggressive.
Yeah, yeah. So you've decided you're ready to sell. You've picked a realtor. You're prepared to sell. Now it's time to actually list the home, get it on the market. Right now, like we've alluded to, you sort of listed on day one and you plan for showings day 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even day 6, and then offers on day 6 or 7 is kind of pretty typical.
You try and
right now.
capture a few weekdays and a weekend every time.
Exactly.
I think that's what people like to do. It used to be offers every Sunday, and it was just beating every realtor up because you're trying to enjoy some time with your family.
Every Sunday
you got to submit a bunch of offers, and if you have listings, you have to receive a bunch of offers.
Yeah.
I feel like we've all gotten off of that now, and they're kind of spread between Monday, Tuesday,
The
Wednesday.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday offers are due.
But
for sure.
I find there's actually a difference in what day you pick on that too. Like I find if you go like a later, like Wednesday, Thursday, you might lose a few people because they were bidding Monday, Tuesday.
People sort of ask about this window all the time. Like, well, why do we do that? And, why is it so short? And why is it not longer? Blah, blah. It's that optimal window of you create the sense of urgency while also giving everyone a chance to see it. Because you go too short, not everyone gets to see it, and that doesn't help the seller. If you go too long, then buyers start going, oh, well, maybe, yeah, that's right. We'll think about it another
There's new
day.
options.
Yeah, and then a new home comes on the market. So it's a tight, condensed window there with a little bit of strategy. Again, that's why you pick a realtor who knows what they're doing.
And go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, just to continue the listing process, you should prepare to be out of the house for much of that window. Again, this is just speaking for today's market right now, where those viewings are going to come in pretty hot and heavy, and it's easier on the seller if you stage it once, clean it, and just leave for a few days.
Exactly. Take a little vacation if you can, or family member, or rent a spot somewhere. Like just do something if you can. I find that's the easiest because otherwise, it's a nightmare to be out. Like people will start showing up at 8. And they will literally be there until Chandler will be there until 8:30.
Yeah, yeah.
Chandler loves his night showings.
Man, I had one time where we had to change. So showings are typically restricted to one group at a time, and usually it used to be like you book it for an hour.
Typically and usually.
Yeah, and it used to be 1 hour. That you could book, and then it was shortened down to like 30 minutes. And now there's been some listings where it's like you got 15 minutes to get in and out.
Now it's a supermarket,
Because
and you all line up outside.
Yeah,
and as quick as you can go through, and then there's another person that's following you in, and then there's another car parking in the driveway, and 2 more down the street waiting to pull in.
Yeah, one of these things that we didn't have this in the list here, but for people who legitimately have not sold a home or been involved in this for a while, you give a spare key to the realtor who secures it in a lockbox on the property. And that lockbox is only accessible by licensed realtors who subscribe to this service to access the box. And it records who's been in there when. So that's a little nuance that
They're amazing.
yeah.
They are amazing. Also, I wouldn't be too concerned about the box getting broken into. It is like Fort Knox. It's
Yeah,
a
man.
stainless steel box coated in vinyl. Like you'd have to blow it up.
Yeah,
to get in.
They're pretty tough. And your listing agent will not be accompanying buyers on the showings. That can
Sometimes,
happen. Like
sometimes.
sometimes a stranger calls off the sign, and as a listing agent, you show them. But most often, it's going to be another agent representing their own buyers, and they're going to go in privately so they can, see the place and speak amongst themselves.
If you really want to throw your listing agent for a loop, ask that they're there for all showings.
Oh, that's not even funny, Neal, man. That's not funny. So they're
Get a higher sale price.
That's cruel, man. No. There's always the question like, well, what if, like, do you have any buyers for my home? Right? This is a big question. And this is how some agents can say, oh, I'm a top producer in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
In fact, I've got so many buyers looking in this
Yeah.
neighborhood. I can, probably even bring one of my buyers by. And
That's
it
when
helps
I call
them.
Chandler and bring Chandler with me.
It helps them get the listing.
Yeah.
I always say, like, yeah, I might have a buyer for this home. However, you can either have just my one or two buyers, or you can have the 1,500 agents in our market trying to sell your home. Statistically, it's far more likely that one of them are going to have the perfect buyer for you.
Yeah.
Because I'd rather tell people honestly rather than like, oh yeah, like I'll sell it for you, like with a buyer too. It's like, no, you want all the agents with all their buyers, any company coming through.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, like I guess not always, but any big agent will have probably buyers for your home that are going to be interested and want to see it. But like you said, you might get someone that's willing to pay more or have better conditions or be in a better financial position.
Yeah.
So you always want to go to MLS as much as even a realtor might push you to say take that offer because it's let's say a double end situation for them where they get both the buying and selling commission. It's always worth getting MLS. Honestly, like you're just gonna find more.
Yeah, the
pools.
time I find that that people don't go on the MLS is usually have to do with disturbing tenants or like a real focus on privacy.
Yeah.
That's the time that I find people do the off market stuff. Another little thing, just like to be prepared for as a seller, stuff's gonna not quite go perfect. There's gonna be people who leave the back patio unlocked.
People walk through with their shoes on.
There's gonna be people who, and man, it just kills you as a listing agent because you just assume that the buyer's agent is going to double check that the patio door is locked.
The lights are off.
And like, all of these little things, but inevitably, sadly, things happen. So it is advisable that either you swing by late at night to secure the property or have your agent or a neighbor, someone come by and just double check the property every night when you're leaving it vacant for these long periods of showings.
And on that same note, also usually best to have your pets out of the home. I find
my God.
dogs are 99% of the time gone. Cats tend to stick around.
I know.
Which is sometimes okay, but surprisingly, cats, when there's new people, seem to want to get out of the house very fast.
I love this. I'm going to give this little tidbit of advice to sellers out there. You want to make the viewing experience of your home as simple and enjoyable as possible.
Yeah.
That means if there's an alarm system, disarm it. Right? Because the first impression buyers and their agents get of your home is, oh my gosh, where's this thing? Just 1 second here. I'm fumbling with my keys. It is a high anxiety situation as soon as they walk into your home. Mm-hmm. Then they have to read a sign that says, don't let the cat run out. It's a house cat. And these are things, as silly as it sounds, they don't create a enjoyable, welcoming experience to your home. The other thing is I hate when sellers, or their agents rather, I should say, put the lockbox, right? This is the device that holds the key on an obscure part of the house.
On like the top branch of a tree.
Yeah, they're like, oh, it's hanging off the screw on the back of the shed, and it opens the door to the side basement. Because the key that they use is going to be the door that they walk through, which is going to give them the first impression of the home.
Yep.
Right? So a tip to buyer, don't have your alarm on. Don't have cats in there that the person needs to be responsible for. Have the key to enter the house in the best light. If that's the front door, if that's the side door, because you have a big mudroom, whatever it is, like put yourself in the buyer's shoes. How do you want them to experience your home?
And I'm going to add two more on there, and these are for my mom. Make sure to have cookies for the buyers prepared and warm. And last but not least, and I love doing this, I remember being a little kid doing this, boiling cinnamon sticks in water to make it smell.
Are you serious?
Yeah, make it smell like we baked in the
My
house.
God, what is this, 1992?
Yes, and I ran through the house. Yeah, see, Mark did too. I ran through the house with a pot of water that's like steaming
so cliche,
and it smells
man.
like cinnamon. It smelled amazing.
Man, just get yourself... this is a good question. People ask me all the time, what's the best
Natural.
scent? I say fresh paint. So I say if you really want a scent, right? Go out and get a can of trim paint.
Chandler's trying to make huffing paint a thing.
No, but like people do not like, especially fragrant places. They just don't, right? It's overwhelming. And sometimes, how many times do you walk into a place where there's a strong smell and they go, "Do you think they're trying to hide something?"
Oh yeah, all the time.
Right? So
Or it smells like litter box.
Yeah, like if you're gonna have a scent in there, make it really, really mild, or paint your foyer. Paint the trim around the front door, because fresh paint is the best smell when walking into a house, because it makes you think about a home that's been freshly updated and is well maintained.
I gotta say,
It's a little
the
nugget
smell,
for ya.
it makes a huge difference. I was in a house today. It's a triplex. I think you might have been in it, and it was smoked in like crazy.
Oh yeah.
Everything was yellow, but for some reason, it kind of smelled like Febreze.
Oh,
And-
heavy Febreze. You got there 2 hours after me. My nose still hurts from
Okay,
the Febreze.
mine wasn't bad. I came in and I was like, I was walking around kind of slow. I was like, this
The
place
masks
isn't.
help. The masks help a
Yeah,
lot.
true. But I was like, this place isn't too bad. But I'm like, if I came in here and I got a headache from the stink of the nicotine pouring out of the walls,
Yeah.
I would have been like, let's get out of here. This place is crap. But I kind of hung out because I was like, that's not so bad. Whatever.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
chatted inside the house.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we should backtrack and say, try to make sure your house doesn't smell and is not dirty and all these things. I guess that goes.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah, I think
without
that's
mentioning.
that's unsaid. And yeah. But anyways, so you now have listed it, and the day has come. It's now Tuesday at noon. Your listing agent has received 43 emails, 800 phone calls, 76 texts. Everyone asking the same question: do you have any offers, and how many do you have?
Yeah, and I actually had this. I've listed a place here, and my seller was asking for feedback. And do you find this right now? Things are moving so quickly that agents do not give much feedback anymore. Because it used to be you show the property on day one, and then maybe on day two, maybe day three, you give a little feedback.
Yep.
Right now, it's so quick. They show the house, and either they're writing on day 5 or they're not. You never hear from them. So it's like pulling teeth to get some of this feedback from buyer's agents. Also, they feel like, they don't need feedback from me. They probably have so many showings and they're getting so much interest that I don't even need to give feedback. So I sort of told this to my seller, and I could tell that she was a little sad and upset. She's like, well, I'm kind of used to getting feedback. I've sold before. I'm like, I promise you we will get feedback. I'm just telling you it may not be instantaneous. And it won't be from everyone. It just won't.
I'm guilty as charged. I'm busy, and when it happens, we're all busy.
No, I don't give feedback.
Yeah.
I get feedback if we're interested in the property.
That's same here. I go on there and I open it and I'm like, these 3 are already sold. I can't, because we have an app that says where you put in your feedback, and I open it and I'm like, sold.
Yeah.
I missed all these ones, and in my head I'm like, yeah, it's a beautiful house. They're gonna get 15 offers. They don't need me being like 5 out of 5, beautiful house. They already know, because the offer is $300K over asking.
This is why the feedback is essentially changed in this market to expressions of interest, right? For the most part,
Yeah.
either you're not interested, and then why would you take the time to give the feedback?
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'll have an agent say, listen, it went well, but just so you know, we're not going to be offering, right?
Yeah.
And that's great feedback, to have, so you know who's not going to follow up.
Yeah.
But otherwise, people saying, hey, we think we might offer. And that's buyer's agents registering interest, so that if something develops on the property, a bully offer or a change or something, you as a listing agent know to reach back out to them.
To touch base.
So you've gone through the process. You've laid out your offer strategy, your campaign. The day has arrived. You've got the offers.
You have 5 in hand.
Say you've got 5 in hand. The first thing sellers are sometimes surprised to know is that you're going to be responding to those likely the same day. People are like, so what, do we get back to them in a couple of days? Like, no.
You're getting back in 6 hours.
Yeah, it's very common for an offer to say be due at 4 o'clock and left open until 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And so when you're planning your listing strategy, part of it is to be available that night.
Yep.
Do not make your offers due a night that you've got your grandmother's birthday and are going to be able to be reached by phone.
Yep, exactly. So you need to be prepared to do so. In this time, again, a really good agent can help you get a very good offer and help you get it cleaned up. Versus just presenting you the offers and you having to make a selection. If they have relationships with some of the agents that have sent in the offers and or know the techniques to improve the other offers, they can work with you to help get a better offer on your table, whether it be on a price point or whether it be on conditions or on the dates that you need. So it's really important that you have someone that's comfortable doing that and comfortable picking up the phone and chatting with these people, because that can make all the difference.
And maybe even has a rapport with different agents, because I always tell sellers when I'm sitting down with them, we're obviously going to choose the best offer on its merits, but what if some of these offers are close?
Mm-hmm.
How well do I know each one of these agents? That is part of the dynamic, because all right, I know I've dealt with this person before. I know how they behave during the inspection period representing their buyers. I know that they work with pre-approved buyers because I've done deals with them before. So there is an element of that. You want an agent who knows their colleagues quite well. One thing I realized that we didn't kind of go through with number 3, preparing to sell, but it comes up now, is you should have an idea of what your priorities are, right? What is your goal price, right? That's part of your listing strategy. What is your goal price? What is your preferred move-out date?
Yep.
If you're buying another place or if you're moving to an apartment, but it's not ready until the 1st of September, that means you need a closing date after the 1st of September.
Yep.
So you should have all of those items prioritized and identified and have already communicated them to prospective buyers. So the hope is that when those 5 offers come in, they've already got the closing date that you want, right? They already maybe have waived inspection because you provided the inspection report.
Yep.
They've already reviewed your disclosure document that says the oil tank probably needs to be
Asking for documents you've already provided.
Yeah, the hope is that when those offers come in, they're clean. And now you really are just looking down to price and subtleties in the differences in conditions.
Yeah, no, 100%. I guess, yeah, so then you pick your offer. And you don't want one that's, if it's Chandler represented by Marcus, you got to watch out because they do cashback deals.
Jeepers.
But no, so now you accept it. Now, understanding when you accept an offer, let's say there is conditions, and likely there will be. Today's market's made it where a lot more get removed, but you still see a fair number of them. And really the big ones to look out for are they need financing. And again, this is where your agent should call and speak to them and see, like, when you say you need financing, have you been to a bank? Like, is this just a hope and a dream, or you just have a down payment, or have you guys have a pre-approval done that's actually valid, or are you paying cash? What does it mean? And then also an inspection. That's like the biggest one, I'd say, hands down. They're going to be bringing in a home inspector, potentially someone to inspect the well, the septic, if there is one. That is something that you need to be comfortable with. They're going to come into the house for 3 hours and basically pick apart everything. And they're going to open cabinets, they're going to open doors, they're going to go into absolutely everything you can.
Yeah, and again, your agent will explain this to you, like, hey, you need to have that room accessible because that's where the sewer line clean out is.
Exactly.
Right? You need to have that closet cleaned out because that's where your attic access is.
Exactly.
If it's on septic, you need to have your septic tanks accessible. That means you might have to book a company to dig them out.
Yes.
All of these things you need to be prepared, because there's nothing worse for a seller when they get those offers, they accept when they say, so now what? It's like, oh yeah, we forgot to talk about this. You need to do all these things.
It's a bunch more work.
Yeah. I would say getting the offers, step 1. Step 2 is getting through the due diligence.
That due diligence period just is also going to be about 2 weeks. It's shortened up. It used to be 2 weeks almost always, and nowadays they've shortened to 10 days, almost 5 days sometimes.
Yeah, because and as a seller, you might want the one that has the shortest period, because then as quick as possible, is your home actually sold, or are these buyers going to flake or move on or not get their financing, and then you have to get back on the market. So as a seller, you like a shorter conditional period in most cases.
Understanding that if somebody needs financing and they put in a 3-day conditional window, that there's not always a chance. Like, sometimes I've seen it get approved in 24 hours, but 9 times out of 10, the approval is going to take 5 business days, and in COVID time, that's 7 or 8 business days. So, like, just understand they can put whatever they want on that sheet, but it can also be partially a technique as a buyer to lock down this property and then come begging for forgiveness, saying, hey, we need a bit more time.
Yeah, I've been in situations, I'm sure you have as well, where I look at the condition and I'm like, man, there's no way they're getting that done in that time. So sometimes as a listing agent, you're advising, listen, they're saying, like, what day is it today? Today, Thursday?
Yeah.
They're saying they're going to get this done on Tuesday. They probably forgot that it's a 4-day long weekend, right? They're not going to get this thing done on Tuesday. So we can accept this, but we might need to be mindful of the fact that they're likely going to need to extend. The other thing, which is really big in the market right now, is if a client waives the financing, you as the listing agent have to have a conversation with your seller and a conversation with the buyer's agent that what happens if the bank needs an appraisal? Because you can have no financing requirement technically, but the bank may still need an appraisal on the property. There's nothing worse than going to a seller a week after the deal is firm and saying, oh yeah, the buyers need to come back in with an appraiser, because they're going to go panic mode.
Yeah.
Why do they need to come back? What if it doesn't appraise out? Which is a legitimate question. If it doesn't appraise out, the buyer's going to have to make up that difference. So in this market, I'm asking a lot of buyer's agents, hey, I see you waive financing. You probably are going to have an appraisal then. What's going to happen if the appraisal comes in short?
Exactly.
Is your buyer going to top this thing up?
Exactly. And that's, again, it's where a good buyer's agent will let them know that that's a situation, or they can pay cash if need be. But 100%, I'm with you on that, because a lot of people do waive it, but most times they still intend to utilize financing, especially when rates are low, on and on and on. So yeah, that's an important one.
And you are out of the house for the inspection. That's been an awkward one I've come across before. Like I show up with a buyer clients. I'm like, hey, we're here for the inspection. And I couldn't help notice that your sellers are sitting in the kitchen still because they just didn't know, right? They're like, oh, I thought we stayed here during the inspection in case the inspector had any questions.
Yeah.
Like, that's adorable, but no, get out.
With the dog and the cats.
Get all out.
And you don't need to do the cinnamon trick for the inspector. He's going to look through everything and he's not going to smell it.
So like, where's the cinnamon?
So now you've gone through that period and it's time to firm the deal up. But they've did their inspection and they came back with a 10 grand issue.
Yeah, next round of negotiations. And this is something that your agent will prepare you for in advance that this could come up. No one likes
the deck
it.
shot.
Yeah,
I didn't expect it to be shot.
Yeah, and as a seller, this is also why you try to be proactive and disclose anything that you know of, because, again, that lessens the chance of this coming. But inspectors is what they're there for. They find things, and it's often a surprise to both the buyer and the seller.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no rule as to what to do with the issue that's come up. The
It's
buyer,
hard negotiation.
yeah, it's just straight up negotiation. Like the buyer could walk away, like that. They're within their.
This is partially where the seller's market, buyer's market thing comes from, I find, too. Like, when it's a buyer's market, the buyer has a lot of strength in this time to be like, deck shot, I want 10 grand off and a new deck. And you're like, wait a second, if I'm fixing it. But in a seller's market, like we kind of have now, you're like, deck shot, you're like, yeah, cool. Like, either you're going to buy it or I'm just going to jack the price up another 300,000 and throw it back on market and it'll sell anyways. And so you're seeing a lot of buyers that are just having to stomach it. The inspection report's more for their own knowledge than really anything else.
Yeah.
But I do remember, like, when I first started, it was more of a buyer's market. You would get nitty gritty. Like, we would get into we're like, oh, these two outlets don't work, so we need $400 off. And they were like,
oh, I know.
yeah, sure. Like, no, like if it means we keep this deal together, like we'll sign that, no problem.
Yeah.
And so it's
there's a science to that as well. Like as a seller, like how do you navigate that? You trust your agent to kind of help you through it. It might involve getting quotes. It might involve getting a second quote to counter the quote that the buyer has.
Yeah.
And you can either do the work, you can offer money off the purchase price. There's really no hard and fast rule to what can come out of that negotiation. Because you can also stand your ground and say, nope, take it as Neal kind of alluded to. But you want to trust the guidance of your realtor, because the ultimate goal is to get the property sold. You don't typically want to go back on the market, because when you go back on the market,
infrequently do you get more money.
Infrequently do you get more money. And in fact, like sometimes the optics of having a deal fall on inspection looks a little bit less than ideal to future buyers. They're going to ask the question, right?
Often. And if I find once you fall once, it seems like it happens a couple times more. I feel like it's a mental game at that point for some of the buyers. Like, it's like, well, the person before me backed out and I found a couple things too, so it's probably not worth it, so I'm going to back out as well.
It's also, you lose that optimal stress window that we talked about, where there's that sense of urgency with the buyers, right? Once the property's been on the market for a little while, it doesn't have that sense of urgency. And
everybody gets a shot.
Yeah, it's hard to recapture that lightning in a bottle, so you try to make that offer work.
What do you suggest to somebody that, okay, there's like a $500, well, maybe more than that, a $2,000 repair to be made? They want $2,000 off, or do you do the repair because your guy thinks he can get it done for $1,000?
I mean, that's going to be case by case with the seller, right? Like some sellers are saying, I prioritize every dollar in my pocket.
Yeah.
My personal preference and what I would advise people say, hey, generally speaking, it's kind of easier to just give the money off the price. You're about to go through a move. There's so much involved in going through a move. And also, anytime someone starts work, it could snowball into something else, right? Give them a little bit, give them the money off.
This is the thing. You go to fix one thing and you might find another item. The other thing is like agreeing upon the quality of how it's done and making sure it has a warranty and this and that. They say you're replacing one piece of laminate, and then the buyer's like, well, I expected Taylor Flooring to do it and give me a lifetime warranty on that piece of laminate and and this color and that. And
here's the other interesting one. So there's a basic principle out there, and this should make sense to people. You don't get new for old, right? You don't get new for old.
Yeah.
So say
also accounts for appraisals.
Well, but this is one sometimes like, well, the hot water tank is 7 years old, and our inspector says it only lasts till 10 years. This used to come up, man. When things were buyer's markets, like there's only 3 years left on this hot water tank. It's like, well, we're not going to give you a new one because there's an old one that's working there.
Yeah.
Right. So you didn't believe you were getting a new one. And maybe it was a surprise. Maybe you couldn't tell by looking at it, but you knew you were getting a used one, right? There was no misconception that you're getting a new one.
Yeah.
So if a new one in this market costs $1,300, if you were to concede something on that, and I'm just using this as an example, you wouldn't concede the full cost of one.
Exactly.
Right? And where that comes in sometimes is appliances. So if you're like, you know what? The dishwasher's acting a little funny. A new dishwasher's $1,200 to get a good one, or maybe it's $1,000. It's like, yeah, well, you didn't think you were getting a new one though, and I'm not going to give you money for a new one when there's like an old one here. Like, so I'll give you the value for the used one, right? So there's again these little nuance of negotiations in there of what values you can assign to things, which is subjective ultimately, right? But
I was gonna say exactly in a buyer's market, the buyer's like, I don't care. I'm wanting the money for a new one.
yeah,
And so you'll see that. And then in today's market, in seller's market, they're like, I don't care. I'm just gonna take the dishwasher with me.
yeah,
So like,
you get no dishwasher, you get dish soap.
we're sending you an amendment. We're keeping the dishwasher.
Yeah. So you get through that process, and ultimately, once everyone's on the same side and the buyer has satisfied all of their due diligence and you've come to an agreement, you firm up the sale of the property, which now includes a waiver form, or at least an acknowledgement of if it requires a waiver form if they've had conditions in the deal saying we are satisfied with those conditions now, and that is when your property is sold. So you're on the market active, you have an accepted offer subject to due diligence, that's conditional pending, and then once those conditions are waived, you are sold, and then you are closed. So closed actually happens quite a bit after sold.
Exactly. So to frame up the deal, there's two things. So you sign that waiver form. That's basically the buyer signs that waiver form explaining that they have done their due diligence and they have confirmed that they are buying this house. Usually attached to that, sometimes earlier, but usually attached to that also comes a deposit. And with that, there's a deposit that you had agreed upon earlier. And it varies. Honestly, I feel like when I started, it was $2,500 for every house. Now, to show strength, a lot of people are increasing those deposits.
Oh, yeah.
10, 25, 50, $100,000 deposits. And those go into trust with your lawyer, and you will not get those funds until closing. Sometimes in commercial deals, you'll see them get released a little bit early, or they'll be made non-refundable. But that deposit is there, and at that time, that's kind of give you some security, even though you're like, well, how do we know they're actually going to show up on closing day? Well, that deposit, plus obviously all the documentation, is there to kind of give you some confidence in that. And technically, the idea is if they didn't show up on closing day, you would take that deposit and keep it.
Yeah, so I get that question every now and again. Like, well, what happens now? Like, so they're locked in, right? They're locked in. What if they don't? What if they don't close?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I mean, like they could get struck by lightning tomorrow, right? Like things do happen.
Yeah.
But contractually, they're obligated to close that property.
Yeah.
If they don't, if they try to back out, their deposit is
Forfeited.
Is forfeited. So there's that element. But if the deposit's only $10,000, there are people who would walk away from a home over, and be like, I'll lose my $10,000, blah, blah. You can then sue them either for damages or for specific performance.
Yeah.
So most people in these rare instances that this happens, they just resell their home as quickly as possible and then start a lawsuit against the buyers.
Yeah.
And that lawsuit would be for losses or damages, like which you'd have to talk to a lawyer about putting a value on them. A real quick one is if then you go and sell the property for $20,000 less, you can argue that there's $20,000 worth of damages there, plus extra time and energy incurred and
rental,
carrying
whatever,
and all these things. Or you can sue for specific performance, which basically you're suing someone to execute on a contract, right? Or a judge will order them to close the purchase of that property.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So
the other thing I want to mention, I think some people might be a little bit confused by this, and I know I was when I first started, is that deposit goes in if it goes in during the conditional period, like this buyer still has the opportunity to terminate the contract and they don't lose a deposit to you.
Right.
Like if they find something on inspection, like the foundation's caving in and you guys can't come to terms with a price, or there's no way that they can basically fix it and be prepared to get into that home, they can terminate that contract. They don't owe you a deposit.
No.
Even if the deposit's in, it gets released back to them during that conditional period. Only once they give you that waiver saying we're purchasing this house, we're going through with the process, does that deposit basically become yours effectively. Prior to that, during that conditional window, if they get rejected on financing, same deal. If the deposit's in, they're getting it back, assuming it's during the conditional period. But like Chandler said, if you don't have a financing clause and they go through the process and then they get an appraisal after the fact and it doesn't make up the difference, or it doesn't show up as the full price and they have to make up the difference, that's on them, or they're going to have to forfeit their deposit to you because they didn't have a financing clause and they're past that conditional date.
Yeah. So as you're leading up to closing, the closing date is the date that you leave the property or essentially hand over title to the new owners. Yeah. This is the actual closing of the transaction. So you need to also think about the logistics of that. That includes disconnecting the utilities from your name and making sure they're transferred over to the new owner. Internet as well.
Like that's the one that always gets forgotten.
Yeah. And with the internet, it's like, oh, shoot, I needed to take that bell box because otherwise they're going to charge me $150. Like all these little things that you need to sort out with your move. You also need to plan actually getting movers, making sure the property is clean and tidy and has not been damaged since the time of the sale. And prepare for a final walkthrough from the buyer who's going to do one last visit to make sure that everything is the same.
And you want to be out the day before. So if your closing is
Totally,
April
yeah.
15th, you need to be out April 14th. And like honestly, that empty out process and getting it to the point of like swept clean, really it should be properly fully cleaned, is a process. And I honestly recommend hiring a company to come do it, because after all the moving, you are dead and you do not want to have to drive back to the house to Swiffer and vacuum the thing.
This is also a really good time to reopen dialogue. Like, sometimes you sell your home, you go through the due diligence, the deal is firm, and then there's like another 45 days or 60 days until you're closing, and you won't have as regular contact with your agent, and your agent won't have as regular contact with the buyer during that period of time.
Yeah.
This is a good time to check back in kind of a week leading up and saying, okay, so what do I need to do here? It's like, well, you need to clean, you need to move, you need to pack your stuff up, you need to transfer utilities out. We also need to be reminded of what's included in this deal. Like, remember, we're leaving all of the window coverings. That was negotiated as part of the deal. We are emptying out the shed of all debris.
Yeah.
If there is anything that you're thinking you might leave in that home, you need to tell me first so I can clear it with the buyer. Because there's nothing worse than the seller being like, what? I thought you wanted this collection of rough sawn lumber. I was just going to leave it in the shed.
This collection of black garbage bags full of garbage in the shed.
No, but like sometimes sellers genuinely like, oh, they want this. This is a perfectly valuable hutch. I'm just going to leave this hutch in the dining room because I'm assuming the next people would want it.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they? And then you get to closing and the buyers do their final walkthrough and they say, we don't want this hutch and it's going to be $300 to remove. And now you've got a headache on your hands. So leading up to closing, make sure you're really in communication with your agent, who is in turn in communication with the buyer's agent, so that there's no misunderstanding in terms of what's included with the property and what condition and cleanliness and vacant possession is going to
Emphasis
look
on
like.
condition. The house also needs to be in the same condition as when they did their inspections, when they went and walked through the house. If you punch a hole in the wall or something gets knocked off or something
got a
breaks
six-story
during the
here.
moving, that has to be fixed prior to closing, because otherwise they're going to come do their pre-close walkthrough on the day of closing before they release the funds, and they're going to we didn't buy it with this giant hole in the wall, and you're either going to be responsible to get that fixed, or they're going to do a holdback and they can hire the company of their choice to come and fix it.
Yeah.
There's a little helicopter flying by us right now.
Flying by. Couple things. I've had properties that something leaked.
I would say the leak's going to be the most common one.
Yeah. So like you sold the property, everything is good. It's like, oh my gosh, like we had a crazy windstorm. It blew off 3 shingles and the roof leaked. It's like, yeah, you got to repair that to the condition it was in. One, when I was in high school, man, I think I was in grade 11 or grade 12. I can't remember. But this girl in grade 10, early on in the year, like I think it was in September, her parents had sold their house. So it was empty, but she still had a key. And she decided that, I'm going to make some friends. I'm going to throw a big party.
No.
This is back in the day, man. This was like before Facebook. So I don't know. I think it like went around on ICQ or MSN Messenger, and everyone was like, man, this party's going off down the south end. This was like not a cheap house. And it was completely empty. No furniture, no anything. Great place to have a party. And how would her parents know? That place got trashed. I remember someone just punching holes in the drywall and kicking out spindles of the banister.
No way.
And needless to say, her parents found out.
I would imagine.
They had to restore the property to its condition before the sale would be completed. And my buddy, I think it was my buddy
$100,000
Rich,
party.
shout out Rich O'Coin. I think he like left his jacket there, so he had to go back the next day. And her parents were there, like just devastated. He's like, yeah, that's my jacket right there. I'm just gonna need to grab that. But in that case, like they would have had to spend however many thousands of dollars to get the property ready to close.
Did you kick a hole in the wall?
No, man, I'm not that kind of guy.
You knocked out one spindle. Oh yeah, you knocked out a few spindles.
I did not. Yeah, so the property. That's just
Anyways, so let's go quickly back over the steps.
Yeah, I'll fire the heading at you. You give me one sentence.
Okay. Sure.
Step 1: decide that you are truly ready to sell.
Mentally and financially.
All right. Also, have a destination where to go. Step 2: pick a realtor.
Make sure he or she is knowledgeable about the area, but that you also can communicate and relate with them, and you get along with them, and they can help you get through this process.
I'm putting you on the spot with these. So
You
are. Prepare your home and yourself to sell.
Okay, so you got to pick a price or a price range. You got to pick a date that's going to go up, and understand what you're going to do for improvements and everything to get it ready to go.
All right. List the property.
You list the property.
Get it on the market. And get out of there. Offer and review time. Offer review time.
You're going to sit with your realtor. You're going to go over all the offers that come in, if there is a bunch or if there's just one, and he's going to explain to you what's going on with it, so you can make a decision at that point.
Step 6: conditional period.
This is after the offer is accepted. You're going to spend 2 weeks getting your house inspected, and they're going to get their financing approved. and then you're going to prepare for closing.
7, locking in that deal.
Locking in the deal. You're going to receive a deposit and a waiver from the buyer saying that they're buying this house, and now you're literally waiting for closing day.
And closing date.
You're going to have the house empty and clean and ready for the buyer to come through. You're going to make sure no spindles are kicked out, no holes in the wall, and it's going to be ready to
Good
go.
party, though. There were people from Dartmouth there. So this was a Halifax South End party, and I remember like there were people from Dartmouth, and we're like, man,
For a high
this
school party
is
to
really
drag them all
popping.
the way
Like these
across.
guys from Dartmouth came. Yeah. Anyway, good times.
Good stuff.
If anyone remembers like who that person was or remembers that party, anyone from like QEH,
if someone has
comment
pictures,
on this and like, yeah.
what did you guys use for pictures? Was there pictures?
We just like everyone stood still and someone did a
Someone did a
charcoal
quick-
drawing. Man, it was actually like digital cameras, man. Like MP3 players were coming
No
out and
way.
around there. But my buddy had a digital camera we called Bobby Digital, and yeah, but it would only fit like 50 photos, and they were not good. But oh,
Disposables.
man, this is a good thing. There's no pictures, man. Because nowadays there's be pictures of that.
I
It'd
know.
be online. It'd be a bad thing, man. So the good old days where nothing was, no video evidence.
The good old days.
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks for listening. That's how you sell your house. I'm sure leave us some comments. I'm sure there's a few things that we missed, and there's still things that people are interested in finding out about. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Thanks everyone for the support. It's been awesome. We've been getting lots of feedback, lots of questions. So let's keep doing it.
All right, on.
Thanks
Take
for
care.
listening.
Bye. Thanks so much for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. Don't forget to subscribe. But also check us out on Instagram and TikTok. You can find all the links below. Thanks again for checking us out.
When I was broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich habits.